You open the fridge. You grab something. You barely think about it. Food is always there. It always has been for you. But for almost the entire history of our species, that was not true. For nearly 300,000 years, humans had no fields, no fridges, no stored grain waiting in a barn, no safety net at all. And somehow, they didn't just survive. They thrived. So how did people live for thousands of generations with nothing planted, nothing stored, nothing guaranteed? The real answer is far stranger than they struggled. Struggle is what came later. Before farming, survival looked almost nothing like what you'd expect. Picture a small group, maybe 20 people, maybe 40. They move through the landscape together, carrying almost nothing, because almost nothing is theirs to carry. No house to return to, no crop to protect, just knowledge. Deep, layered, inherited knowledge about where food is, when it appears, and how to get it before something else does. This is called foraging. It means finding and gathering food that already exists in the wild instead of growing it yourself, and it defined human life for far longer than agriculture ever has. Here's the part that surprises people. Anthropologist Marshall Shalin studied societies like this and proposed something radical. He called them the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more stuff, affluent because they wanted less. Their needs were small, and the environment, if you knew how to read it, usually met them. Wait, doesn't that contradict everything you've heard about caveman life? It does. And that's the twist. Modern researchers have studied groups who still live this way today, like the Hadza people of Tanzania. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe spent years documenting their daily lives. What he found wasn't constant desperation. It was rhythm. Hunting some days, gathering tubers, berries, and honey on others. Long stretches of rest in between. Hours of food-related work per week that, in some measurements, were fewer than a typical modern job. That doesn't mean life was easy. Death was closer. Childhood was more dangerous. A bad season could still be brutal. But the picture of constant grinding starvation? That's mostly a myth, built by people who never had to live it. So how did they actually find enough food every single day without planting anything? The answer is diversity. Farming puts your survival into a small number of baskets. Wheat, rice, maize. If the crop fails, you fail with it. Foraging spreads survival across dozens, sometimes hundreds of food sources. Roots underground, fruit in season, insects, shellfish, birds' eggs, large game when someone gets lucky. If one source disappears, 10 others remain. This is called a broad-spectrum diet, and it's one of the quiet superpowers of pre-farming humans. Your ancestors weren't relying on luck. They were relying on range. Now think about meat. Big animals. Fast animals. How does a slow, clawless, fangless primate catch something like an antelope? Not with speed, with patience. Evolutionary biologist Daniel Lieberman has spent years studying something called persistence hunting. Humans can't outrun a deer in a sprint, but almost no other animal on Earth can sweat the way we do. Most four-legged animals cool down by panting, which only works when they stop running. Humans cool down by sweating through millions of glands across bare skin, which means we can keep moving in punishing heat long after our prey needs to stop. So early hunters would simply keep pace, hour after hour, under the sun, not fast, just relentless. Eventually, the animal would overheat and collapse from exhaustion, while the human, dripping sweat but still upright, finally closed the distance. It's slow. It's exhausting. But it works, and it required almost no tools at all, just legs, lungs, and the willingness to keep going. That single trait, the ability to out-endure almost any animal on the planet, may be one of the most underrated reasons humans survived without farms for so long. But food alone doesn't explain it. Something else mattered just as much. Sharing. In most foraging societies, when someone made a big kill, they didn't quietly keep it. They gave it away. Sometimes almost the entire animal, distributed across the group according to strict, unspoken rules. Why would anyone give away the very thing that might keep them alive? Because tomorrow, they might be the one who caught nothing. This is risk pooling. If hunting is unpredictable, and it is, then sharing food today means someone else shares food with you tomorrow, when your luck runs out. Anthropologists studying groups like the Hadza describe this sharing as almost automatic, almost expected, more like a form of insurance than generosity. It smoothed out the chaos of an unpredictable world. No single person needed to be lucky every day. The group only needed to be lucky together, most of the time. That's a very different survival strategy than what farming would later demand. Farming rewards the individual who plants early, works hardest, and stores the most. Foraging rewarded the group that shared the fastest. There's another piece too, one that's easy to overlook. Movement. Because there was no crop tying anyone to one patch of land, groups could simply leave. If a region dried up, or the animals moved on, or tension built between neighbors, the answer wasn't to fight for the field, it was to walk somewhere else. Anthropologist James Woodburn described many of these communities as immediate return societies. People used resources almost as soon as they found them, without stockpiling large surpluses, which also meant almost nothing tied them down. No granary to defend, no fixed home to lose everything from. Mobility itself was a kind of security. Think about how different that is from your life right now. Your stability comes from staying, theirs came from being able to leave. So picture it fully now. A group moving through a landscape that isn't hostile but generous if you know how to read it. Knowledge passed down for generations about which plant is food and which is poison, which sound in the grass means danger, which season brings the fish upstream. Endurance instead of speed. Sharing instead of stockpiling. Movement instead of ownership. For nearly 300,000 years, that was enough. Entire human lives, generation after generation, built on nothing but knowledge, cooperation, and the willingness to keep walking toward the next meal instead of waiting for one to grow. Then, around 12,000 years ago, in a handful of separate places around the world, something shifted. People started staying, planting, waiting for seeds to become food instead of finding food already grown. It felt, probably, like progress, but it came with a cost that foraging never demanded. Dependence on a much smaller number of food sources, longer hours of labor, and for the first time, real vulnerability to a single failed harvest. You still carry the older version of yourself underneath all of it. Your body still craves variety in your food, not repetition, because for hundreds of thousands of years, variety is what kept your ancestors alive. Your instinct to help someone in a crisis, even a stranger, echoes a world where sharing wasn't kindness. It was survival math. Even your restlessness, that itch to move, to travel, to not stay still too long, might be older than you think. For nearly 300,000 years, this was simply what being human meant. Not a struggle to be endured until something better came along, but a way of living finely tuned to a world that rewarded patience, cooperation, and the willingness to keep moving. Then, in a handful of places, within just the last 12,000 years, people started staying. Planting, waiting, you open the fridge, you grab something, you barely think about it. But somewhere underneath that simple motion is a story 300,000 years long, of endurance instead of speed, of sharing instead of hoarding, of a species that survived not because the world was kind, but because it learned exactly how to read it.